When it comes to video game history, or really any media, most of it tends to be very American-centric. And it makes sense why. A lot of American media is very well documented. And also, just the fact is, a lot of people that make these things are based in the US. That being said, this does have the unfortunate downside of a lot of other countries being glanced over whenever it comes to looking into specific stories. Like, the old story about how the NES was the number one console at the time, even though in Europe, the Sega Master System was way ahead of the NES. So, with people now rising to talk about their own countries, or just different countries in general, why don't we take a look at a little country called South Africa? Specifically, let's take a look at the brief history of the NES in the country. But let's do this a little bit differently. Let's tie this directly into the number one release anyone thinks of when it comes to the NES in question. That being Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. On the Famicom and NES absolutely needs no introduction whatsoever. Mario is literally one of the most iconic video game characters of all time, and the NES is so iconic that Nintendo still can't help themselves but reference it to this day. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever to actually go into a whole story about the plumber. Another thing that also doesn't need an introduction is the world of Mario ROM hacks. People have been hacking this game and doing all kinds of stuff to it since the 1980s. Now, generally, you accept this as just part of the trend, especially with 8-bit NES titles. People hack them, they put them on the shelves unofficially. That is the general case. This is very popular. This was very popular throughout Asian territories, African territories, and even in a good amount of American ones as well. So this is all just generally part of the trend. Some small timer wants to leech on another company's success. Why not throw your own thing on the shelves? But what if a big mainstream company, or suddenly the equivalent of a Toys R Us, not only produced a bunch of Famiclones, and sold them as if they were actual games, actually officially licensed by Nintendo, and then also tried to pass off one of these bootlegs as if it was an actual game, leeching off Nintendo's number one hit? What if instead of Super Mario Bros., we wound up with Merwe and Boetie? A Mario not afraid to smoke his pipe while going down the pipes. Welcome to Stumbler Media Projector. Let's get this started. Wait a minute. Cigarettes are bad for you. So for those that managed to stumble across my blog at first, you may wonder, what's with the random Mario hack on the introduction page? And for those that didn't, well, you're in for a fun ride. From 1948 until 1991, South Africa was under a racist law system simply known as apartheid. Said law system pushed for the separation and unequal treatment of different South Africans imposed by a white minority rule over the predominantly black and non-white population. Response to these laws as time went on became less and less acceptable, and by the 1960s, when South Africa broke away from the UK and became its own country, countries started to impose sanctions, cutting off trade and penalising businesses should they try to invest within the country, with Jamaica leading the charge by being the first country to do so back in 1959. While it would only take until the 1980s for the US to take a stance against apartheid, Japan was way ahead of the game and had imposed sanctions as early as 1962, only for them to end in 1991 with the dismantle of said system. With Japan cutting off trade and investment into the country, this then meant that Nintendo couldn't manufacture or distribute their console in South Africa, the same way that they couldn't do so in Russia due to the ongoing Cold War. So, no NES, no Mario, no Castlevania, no Contra, no 8-bit title of any sort would see an official release in the country. Right? So, what might count as an official release in one country may count as unofficial in another. I mean, hey, if the parent company can't distribute within a country, who's to say no, it's not free game? Who's to say we all can't jump for it? Everybody get ready, it's time for me to make the NES 2. Oh wait, copyright laws say that you can't do that. Yeah, so while sanctions were being imposed on South Africa and many other countries at the time, a lot of companies based in Russia and China were already working on manufacturing their own NES games to jump in on the trend of how popular the media had become at the time. Now, what's interesting here is that both China and Russia were publicly condemning the apartheid actions of the country and had made statements stating they were also pulling sanctions on South Africa. But in reality, China and Russia, specifically the Soviet Union, were doing a lot of under the counter dealings. So you had your bootleg consoles, and then you also had them supporting the freedom fighting party, the ANC, who had been declared illegal by the apartheid government at the time. So this is where things are a little bit muddled. Interesting enough, this practice of officially, unofficially releasing media in your country while it's being sanctioned still continues to this day. A modern example would actually be what's going on in Russia. A lot of companies have flat out withdrawn their support within the country, including a lot of movie studios. And because of that, a lot of Russian theaters have actually resorted to simply playing cam rips of the new latest blockbuster, and no one's going to enforce that, because there's no company in that country to actually enforce. Anyhow, yeah, the racism may be bad, but you know what? There's money in them Table Mountains. Woohoo! Of the bootleg consoles, or as they were called in South Africa, TV games, the popular ones throughout the country were Dendy and Golden China, who were named after their respective companies, and the third one being the Reggie's Entertainment System, which went as far to actually being advertised on TV, games and all. They weren't hiding. You were going to get all kinds of copyrighted material on this little bootleg bugger. That wasn't enough. It wasn't just enough to parade around the fact that you were making a bootleg item in the country and treating it as if it was an official thing. They went the extra step further. They made their own version of Super Mario Brothers. That's right, we went South African with Mario, and we called it Merwe and Boetie. Or, you know, if you want to have a literal English translation, Merwe and Little Brother. I'm older than you. But I'm the one with the bigger gut. And a lot of hot air. Developed at some point in the 80s, and no doubt sold in no relation, Reggie's Toy Store. Now you had a South African branded title to appeal to the local demographic. Well, a small percentage of the demographic. But the weird thing is that actual information on the ROM itself is a bit of a mystery. To this day, we actually have no idea who worked on the hack or where it was even made. Heck, for all we know, it probably wasn't even made in South Africa. A blog by the name of HypN.za covered the ROM hack back in 2021, going as far to actually rip the sprites entirely and dig about in the code, trying to see if there was any trace of who the mysterious hacker could be. And the biggest details that could be pulled from the hack was that it was based on another already existing one that had re-edited a border, which is a common practice in these bootleg releases. After all, if you change the name, no one will know who you're ripping off, right? Hey, I think they're ripping off Sonic the Hedgehog. Another interesting thing that the blogger and the ripper had made note of was the fact that despite coming out in a PAL region, the ROM itself was actually based on the NTSC release, which is not uncommon. Different regions mean squat when you're ripping off developers in other countries. Alright, so where is South Africa? I don't know, it sounds British. There are definitely some extra specific details regarding the ROM and the code, and I'll definitely link it in the description below if you're curious to get into the nitty-gritty stuff. As for here and now, some interesting tidbits to notice is that the only real changes of the ROM hack are the title screen and the Mario Brothers being switched out for the Merwe Brothers, and a game title that missed the memo. Unfortunately, that's kinda it in terms of actual changes to the game. Other characters such as enemies, Toad, Princess Peach, and Bowser just didn't get their sprites changed, let alone any adjustments to reflect that South African flavor. I guess the names that do come to mind that I would have suggested wouldn't have quite worked for a kid's game, though. So, this does raise the question I'm sure some people would have. What happened with the Famiclone scene in the country after 1991? Well, by 1991, a lot of places like Japan decided to repeal the sanctions against South Africa, and this would lead to Nintendo entering South Africa in 1992. And of course, in Nintendo fashion, one of the first acts they did was immediately go after all the companies that were making unofficial versions of their own home media, which admittedly is actually kind of funny. The idea of Nintendo's first steps in South Africa immediately being, hey, look at all the bootlegs! Let's sue them! This did lead to a court case between them and Golden China, with the latter going out of business and being forced to immediately halt any distribution and creation of these illegal games, which, you know, it is fair. They were flat out ripping off Nintendo, sanctions or not. While mainstream distribution of the Famiclone systems were ground to a complete halt, they were still very commonplace to find in a lot of smaller stores throughout the country, even as late as 2025, honestly. Depending on where you go, you can still find a bootleg Famiclone or Famiclone cartridge. It's just, rather than carrying the local branding, it's very clear that these have been imported from China, often through Temu. The NES wouldn't see any official release within the country until the release of the NES Mini, at which during this time we would actually see some Famiclone Minis suddenly rise up too. And in some cases, they would even sneak in mainstream official stores for sale. In some cases, these Famiclone Minis would be displayed right next to the official NES Mini. Well, I can't find any evidence that there was ever any legal proceeding against these Famiclone Minis. Heck, in some places, you can actually still find them for sale. It is a sign that, even with official game releases, Famiclone still managed to maintain a strong presence throughout the country, even if the mainstream distribution had been cut off. The fact that they are essentially cheaper alternatives to the highly overpriced local releases really says a lot. And as for Nintendo, eventually they would find themselves dominating the South African game market, but that wouldn't be until the release of the Nintendo Wii. While the beginnings of South African gaming may not be all too humble, relying on unofficial bootleg oddities, they did set stone for a hobby that would continue to explode in the following decades, to the point that these days most South African gamers would actually like to own legitimate copies of a game that they want to play. And because of that, we're seeing a rapid growing industry. We're seeing a rapid growing fan base for these. People that want the official releases, while Famiclones are mostly dictated to a side note, or part of the history. And it's actually great to see. And here's hoping that gaming in South Africa continues to rapidly grow, even if the prices do continue to grow as well. Good day. I wanted to say thank you very much for watching our first video, and also in case you want to stick around, make sure to hit that subscribe button for future uploads. Who knows what topics we'll be covering? I generally am aiming for movie reviews, sometimes TV show reviews, and also video games, or sometimes just to discuss about different types of media or analyze them a little bit, because why not? There's a lot of fun in that, isn't there? Another thing also is, if you want to support, feel free to click on that Ko-fi link below, and in due time we'll have that Patreon one up soon as well. Thank you kindly, see you next time, and also feel free to check out the blog below. Thank you once more, and special thank you to my first coffee donator, Sega Handsome, for the very first video on the channel. Hope you like it, man.